Welcome to the RBN special. I am your host, James Fauntleroy. So good to see all of you here. Just to let you guys know, this is a special that is being featured on RBN as well as the JB Font channel. So it's so good to see all of you here on this beautiful Tuesday evening. Oh, man, I have my brother from another mother, Nick, joining me, as well as my dear, I like to call her my surrogate auntie, Margaret Kimberley, coming in, joining us. Good to see you both.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much. I love coming on with you guys.
Yeah, it's great. It's blessed to be here with Margaret Kimberley, as always, one of our favorite guests, someone that we follow and we learn a lot from. Great to be here with my brother, JB. We got another Nick and JB show, special in the evening edition. RBN doubleheader. Make sure you guys check out the live stream I did with Nico and Fiorella. So this is a very exciting and fun day. I'm pretty much live streaming with some of our favorite people today, between Fiorella, Nico, Margaret, James, and it's going to be a learning tree today. So
very good. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, definitely. So just to give a blanket hello to everybody, good to see you guys in here today. Also, just in case if you haven't already, go ahead and give a like. This actually helps us out with the algorithm so that we can reach more people, so we can help educate as well as inspire and activate. So thank you very much for that. If you guys have not already, you guys can also join our mailing list at revolutionaryblackout.substack.com. This gives you email notifications whenever we go live or upload any clips as well. And as well, if you guys would like to get in touch with us, you guys can go to revolutionaryblackout@outlook.com. This, if you guys want to give some encouraging words, or if you would like to submit any stories or anything interesting you find that may be good for us to know. So thank you very much for that. Now, what are we talking about today? This is going to be a very interesting subject. We're going to be talking about Syria, what you need to know. And actually, let me take that down really quick. What you need to know. So we're going to be talking about that with Miss Margaret Kimberley, also part of the Black Agenda Report, activist, as well as journalist. So one of the first things that I actually wanted to ask, especially in regards to Syria, is why do many people, particularly State Department actors, say that Bashar al-Assad is a dictator? And is there any validity to what they claim, especially from the State Department?
Well, the term dictator is problematic. There are different kinds of governments and governance all over the world. And anybody that I find that there are absolute dictatorships that are friendly to the US, but they're never called a dictatorship. I mean, it usually means a country the US doesn't like, frankly, and that may or may not be a dictatorship, but they have a different government. Now, Assad's father was president before him. So it's a sort of situation where family connections are important. His father, Hafez al-Assad, was president of Syria for many years. He was to have been succeeded by an older son who passed away. Bashar al-Assad's life is different. Did you know he's an MD? He is, yes, I believe, an ophthalmologist. But he had left Syria. He was living in the UK. had a medical practice. His wife is Syrian, but raised in the UK. I think she's a UK citizen. And when his brother died, his father asked him to come back to Syria. And eventually he became president after the death of his father. So you have someone inheriting this position. Um, generally we have elections, although our elections mean less and less, frankly. So that's not like a leg for us to stand on in condemning the Syrian government.
Sure.
But but to answer your question about dictatorship, I'm wary of using it when it's someone who the U.S. has targeted, as happened with Syria, beginning with the Obama administration. So I don't want to jump ahead of your questions, but the reason that Assad is condemned is that the U.S. was targeted his country for regime change, and there are U.S. troops occupying a quarter of the country. Something I find amazing because I don't remember anybody telling us that. I don't remember Congress being told about that. And then suddenly I read, what do you mean a quarter of Syria is occupied by the U.S. and the U.S. steals its oil and so forth? So that's my response to the dictator charge.
Yeah, and to that point, and JB, I'll pass it right to you after my quick thought. Regarding the dictator point, I definitely avoid, and I agree with Margaret, I avoid at all costs using the language of the empire and defining their enemies in their own terms. Because the people they accuse of being dictators, like Assad, as far as I know, is very standard for the region. And there are people who are much more quote unquote authoritarian, believe in dictator power that the United States props up. But I have to ask you guys, what does that term even inherently mean? Because I will argue that we are the strongest dictatorship. We have a dictatorship of capital.
Yes.
And if you don't know what I mean, they trick Americans, they trick people in the West into thinking that we're not a dictatorship because they have term limits for a few people in office. They have term limits for the president, which is very public, so it gives people the illusion that they're changed. But you guys understand that Dianne Feinstein wasn't removed from power until she died. Dianne Feinstein wasn't removed from power until she died. How we get rid of Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi? And there's swamp monsters like Anthony Blinken who've been in our government forever. We can't get rid of them. Mike Pompeo, these unelected deep state swamp monsters who serve in our government for life and set the agenda the same way a dictator would, because they dictate policy. And we can't get rid of them. So, JB, I'll pass you. That's my initial thoughts.
Well, I mean, now that you mention it that way, it kind of makes me think of the Bush dynasty, right? Of course,
yeah.
Of course, everything started with Prescott Bush, right? Who was the father of George H.W. Bush. And then you also have George H.W. Bush, who was CIA director. And then he went on to be the president of the United States in the late 80s, early 90s. But then you had his son that came back after, there was a, slight, intermission because of a Democratic president, that being Clinton. And then you had George W. Bush. And then, of course, his younger brother, Jeb, was actually running also to be part of that administration. So when it comes to dynasties, I mean, we typically have our own dynasties. The Clintons tried to have a dynasty as well, with Hillary Clinton trying to extend that. So truth be told, and then on top of it, you also have the dynasty of the Roosevelts. You had Theodore and Franklin. So, I mean, as far as families, in fact, a lot of them are brought out in Margaret Kimberley's book, Presidential. If you guys have not, I think you guys need to pick this book up because it's really great.
Thank you.
Shameless plug because, well, hey, it's Margaret.
And JB, one last thought, I'll pass it right back to you, brother. You guys realize that they call our empire, they call Vladimir Putin a dictator. the person who's supported by around 75 to 80% of the Russian people, someone who provides health care to this people, someone who provides maternity leave to the people. We are a country that is ruled by a Congress with 13% approval rating. We are a country in America, which even includes the right, that don't want to fund Israel anymore. Even majority of Republicans oppose sending aid and munitions to Israel now, but we don't get it. We don't get health care, even though Americans don't want it. So I want you guys to ask the question, Margaret, you can chime in if you want to. What does it really mean to be in a dictatorship? Because I'm not praising Putin, but at least he provides people health care. He provides basic needs. Meanwhile, in America, we can't get anything. What does that really mean? You know what I mean? Margaret,
yes, it does. I do know what you mean. And there are absolute dictators in the region who were helping the U.S. in the attempt to overthrow Assad, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. These are absolute monarchies, but they're U.S. friends. And the U.S. was working with them because they want to get rid of the secular Arab governments. Yeah. So, Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's a monarchy, but I would say by any definition, it's definitely a dictatorship with a rule handed down in the family. So yes, it's a term I think we should do without. But as for this country, we definitely live in a dictatorship of capitalism. Absolutely. And despite those changes that you described, they all have the same boss. We have an oligarchy. We all know about the studies that were done that say the U.S. isn't a democracy anymore, that Americans do not get what we want, regardless of who wins. We do not get our needs met. We want to have some sort of national health care system. We don't want military spending to be more than $800 billion. We don't want people to be indebted in order to get an education. We want a higher minimum wage. These are things across the board that most people want, and we have a snowball's chance in hell of getting any of them. So, before we, look far away and ask, is this or that place a dictatorship? I think we can look at this country, which is most definitely not a democracy. And the fact that they talk about it endlessly, what's the expression, protesting too much, something from Shakespeare. The lady does protest too much. So democracy. It tells you it isn't one. I mean, I don't remember all this overuse of the word until recent years, and it's used to attack Trump. And I don't mind people attacking Trump, but let's just be clear about what is going on here. It's an attempt to get us to think that we have some big choice when we don't. I mean, speaking of Israel, there's bipartisan consensus to continue funding Israel, to keep giving them weapons, to keep giving them, and talk about a dictatorship. How long's Netanyahu been in his job? I mean, he was briefly out of office a couple years ago, but this is a man who decides to kill people, and so they die. He'll kill little kids. That's their policy. Ethnic cleansing is their policy. There is no government. Syria hasn't done half the things that Israel has done, and yet they're held up as this, the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, that's a lie. And we have, despite what, there's a range of opinion on Israel, but most people do not want what Congress and the presidents do, which is to back Israel without question, to give them whatever they want. That's not what people want. So we have to ask, well, where is the dictatorship? Who really has a dictatorship?
Yeah, this the point about Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and if I'm correct, I also think the Emirates. I think they also are a monarchy as well. So when it comes to these governments, I don't see anybody protesting very much against them, even though the United States has a very friendly relationship with them. I know they have a parliament, but at the same time, the UK still has a monarchy, even though it is symbolic. It's like, if it's so symbolic, then why do they still, have as much opulence as they do within the UK? Like, why are they allowed to live that high off the hog for the people if it's just a symbolic thing? So the thing is, it's like every single time when people talk about dictatorship, I always have to look at it. I always have to look at them sideways, because I'm like, you know what? You guys say this, but at the same time, look at all these other governments. And then on top of it, technically, we have royalty here in the United States. We have dictatorship here, because who was it that one billionaire that it was going after? I think Claudine Gay. I'm blanking on his name. But he basically didn't want anybody speaking out against Zionism at all. And so because of him being able to crack the whip, so to speak, he was able to make demands and say, well, this is how things should go. Bill Ackman. Yes. Thank you very much, Zach. Bill Ackman.
Yeah,
it's like we already have
Harvard, who he got rid of.
I mean,
yeah, he got rid of the Ms. Gay, the president, who was the president of Harvard. But it was an extraordinary thing. They set up the presidents of Harvard and UPenn and Columbia, all these top schools, and dragged them before Congress. And it was a setup to get them to say anything other than, you can't criticize Israel. They were anti-Semites. They had to leave. That's another, there's someone coined this expression. I wish I knew who I could credit them, that these elite schools are hedge funds with education as a side hustle. So all these schools I just named, they live and breathe at the will of these very rich people. They decide what's going to happen. And these are the people who graduate, and these are the people who run the country. I mean, if you look at their bios, it's always some, quote unquote top school that they attended. They train people to be the managers of the ruling class, and they have big endowments, I think Harvard's endowment is something crazy like $40 billion. Yeah. They don't pay. These are all tax exempt organizations. I'm not talking about your local church, but if it were up to me, they would pay something. But so that's a kind of a dictatorship too. And this class system, which Americans don't like to talk about a class. We're supposed to be this classless society, and anybody can rise as high as they can, as hard as they can work, and blah, blah, blah. But we know that's not true. And you're right about the UK. It's a monarchy. It's the king is the head of state. The prime minister is head of government, but the head of state is the monarch. And you have people, Rupert Murdoch decides what happens in British politics. So if he doesn't like you, his multitude of papers are going to get rid of you. So Jeremy Corbyn didn't have a chance to be elected prime minister, despite the fact that a lot of people liked him, that he was popular. But their political class decides who is. I mean, the past couple of years, they had prime ministers didn't they have like 3 prime ministers in 2 years' time? And it was all these machinations at the top. It wasn't because that's what the people wanted. So I think it's important to keep and look at France. They had an election. The people elected a leftist coalition for their National Assembly. And Macron says, I don't care what you want. And he appoints a conservative prime minister. And his goal is to undermine what the people said they wanted. So democracies are getting less and less democratic. And we should be careful before we cast these aspersions at other countries.
So what is the ultimate goal? Because a lot of times, because I know Aaron Mate actually put out an article about this, about the OPCW cover-up. They were saying that Bashar al-Assad was gassing his own people, that he was poisoning his own people. And Aaron Mate, who is an award-winning journalist, actually debunked that, right? But what is the ultimate goal of these Western countries who are claiming that somebody like him is, a dictator. Really, it's, like I say, it's the chamber pot calling the toilet white. Why in the world are they coming after him, and what is it that they're after?
They're after resources, they're after oil. And I think now we've reached the point in the US empire where they want control for the sake of having control. So it doesn't matter that these monarchies we referred to are friends with the US, have always been undercover friends of Israel, that they have these friends in the region. It's not enough. It's not enough if Saddam Hussein is still in power in Iraq. If Assad is still in power, they want it all. It's full spectrum dominance. It's dominance, economic, military, political. It's control for its own sake. And it's a sign of decline, actually, of a state that it insists on control, because Assad was never against the US. He was no leftist or anything, but they didn't care. They're like, sorry, we want all these countries gone. We want people that we can control, and you're out. And they had succeeded in 2011 in Libya, sadly. And they were like, okay, on to Syria. So the US, their Al-Qaeda proxy, they were called the Al-Nusra Front, but it's Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda we were told to hate and fear after 9/11, it was the same Al-Qaeda, but Al-Qaeda's history was of being a US proxy, in Afghanistan, going back to the Jimmy Carter administration. Mm-hmm. So these jihadist groups always work with the US. They have their own agenda, but the US is happy to use them to further its goals. So the US succeeds in toppling Gaddafi, and they go on to Syria. And Assad, it's good for the world that he was not overthrown. I was thinking today, I was looking back at things I'd written. I wanted to, sharpen my memory of Syria. And these jihadists who the US was sponsoring, they were cutting off people's heads. And I raise this now because for the past year, we were told there were beheaded babies on October 7th. No, but there were beheaded children thanks to US proxies in Syria and in Libya. I mean, they filmed themselves doing this stuff. So I think it's important to remember this, that the US wants full spectrum dominance and gets it with war propaganda. So you claim that Assad is a killer, that it's humanitarian intervention. The U.S. has a right to protect, and it's a kind of land they use it because it's successful. So people hear, oh my God, he's an evil guy. Yes, I think it's fine to get rid of him. Well, that's why they tell you he's an evil guy, so that they have buy-in and minimize any opposition to their designs. So that, I think, in a nutshell, is the story of Syria. And I just want to say one thing. At the time the U.S. attack was at its height, a lot of people on the left, there was a lot of argument about Syria. Should anti-imperialists here be with the Syrian opposition? Now, there was opposition. There was always opposition to Assad. As I said, it was a government run by this family. They had their own system of elites, and anybody else was out. They did not like leftists at all. So communists or socialists were oppressed there. People who wanted to change anything were suppressed in a variety of ways. But the complication to me is, well, actually, maybe it's not complicated. We have to be, if you call yourself an anti-imperialist, you have to oppose U.S. interventions, period, the end. You can make some other commentary about a country that's being targeted, but you have to oppose U.S. intervention. There is nothing good that comes from it. They did a study, I think it's Brown University Cost of War Project. 35 million people have been displaced by U.S. interventions since 9/11. That's Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, and I'm leaving countries out. 35 million people displaced by the people who are refugees, people living in camps, people who had to flee their countries, all because of U.S. interventions. Nobody was fleeing. Whatever Assad did or didn't do, there weren't millions of people trying to get out of Syria. That didn't happen until the U.S., their humanitarian intervention, which words that, should always set off alarm bells in your head. And they used the power of sanctions, unilateral coercive measures to punish countries. So they even called them Caesar sanctions that Mike Pompeo, Trump's Secretary of State, who could very well come back should Trump win. I call them Caesar sanctions. The U.S. steals Syria's money. Basically, Syria can't import the things it needs. Syria can't bring in medicine. They can't help their own people. If you're a Syrian living in this country and you want to help your family in Syria, you can't even send them money. So the U.S. is stealing their oil, punishing them for daring to oppose the U.S. and U.S. troops in occupying a quarter of the country, right next to Russian troops, by the way, because Putin came in and helped Assad. It took him longer than many people thought, but as an interesting story, Putin, and he said this himself, actually, Putin had his own jihadist problem. Russia has a big Muslim population, and in the early 90s and the early O's, some of these same forces that the U.S. used were trying to destabilize Russia in the Caucasus region. So in Chechnya, that's what I was trying to remember. So Putin did not want this jihadist haven in Syria. So he finally, at the 11th hour, came in and helped Assad. And it tells you how simple it was. They just bombed people. They had these huge caravans of the Al-Nusra Front or whomever, and Russia just bombed them, and that was it, and they were gone. And but the U.S. made sure that Syria did not really have a victory and continues to be on the receiving end of U.S. punishment.
Yeah, that was actually part of you actually answered my next question, before I got to ask it. But a lot of people who were talking about how they were against, they said that Putin was bombing civilians in Syria. But if these ones are jihadists and terrorists, then if that's the case, then Putin would be, say that Putin actually did the people of Syria a favor.
Yes, absolutely. People in Syria, however they felt about Assad's government, they did not want their country taken over by jihadists. They were suffering because of the attacks of these U.S. proxies. And that's an extra complication in discussing this, but I think it's important to say Syrians didn't want their country to be this battleground. Why would you want that? To be a refugee, or for your family to be refugees, or for your business or your home to be destroyed. Nobody wants that. So there was support for Assad staying in power rather than these jihadists taking over the country as they did in Libya.
You said something earlier, and I'll pass it right to you, JB, but you said something earlier that I think deserve further emphasis. The fact that there's no good intervention. The Johnny come latelys, these are the fake social democrats. They will criticize like old interventions. They will say like the Iraq war was bad in hindsight. They will say the Vietnam War is bad in hindsight. But then whenever there's a current thing, they will justify why it's a humanitarian intervention. Whenever you hear that word and that term, just know it's a shit lip. That's how people like Mehdi Hassan, and that's why I knew he was always a fraud. A lot of people were starting to wake up now because he's showing more anger at Joe Stein than he is the genocide party. So a lot of people are waking up to him now. But Margaret, you would know, and many people who've been following geopolitics know that Mehdi Hassan has been a fraud because he spent his time spreading lies about Assad gassing his own people. Now, why did they have to spread that lie? because they needed a reason to turn Assad into this evil tyrant instead of someone who was following the will of the Syrian people and fighting terrorists. So this is my last thought, and JB, I'll pass it to you so when we get back on the show. But you guys notice that the Western neocons, the same people who implement harsh interpretation of the law, strict law and order dictates on us, they advocate for libertarian, relaxed, almost abolitionist interpretation of the law when it comes to people resisting governments they don't like. So if you're a terrorist trying to take down the Syrian regime, if Assad goes after you, they will say stuff like, "Oh my God, look, he's suppressing his own people. He's murdering his own people." Okay, what happened to the people who protested on January 6th? They was locked the fuck up, wasn't they? Imagine what would happen if we took up arms against the state. They will murder us, and no one will question them after they murder us. You wouldn't see people saying, "Oh my God, Joe Biden is murdering his own people." Those people wouldn't be saying that. So that's my point. You guys see how they have a very relaxed interpretation of the law, and they expect people to support uprisings and political assassinations. Like they accuse Nicolas Maduro of being a tyrant, even though his opposition teamed with the CIA to try to kill him. But JB, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I blanking on my next thought, but one of the things
as you think about this, I want to show you this as well. Sorry, JB. As you think about your point, I forgot to show this because to Margaret's point, there are people like Mehdi Hassan and many people who think the United States are doing humanitarian interventions in Syria and all these places. They still 80% of Syria's oil output.
That's right.
But they want us to think Assad is the bad guy. But go ahead, James. I just want to share this.
Well, no. You brought a great point. If we're actually trying to help the people of Syria, why are we taking all their oil?
Humanitarian intervention, James.
How is that humanitarian at all? Don't they need fuel?
But it's so insidious. Most of the media won't tell you this. This is one of the things, unless you know who to follow on social media, you have no idea this is true. I mean, most people still get their information from corporate media, and basically it reads like, everything they publish or broadcast reads like a State Department press release. You don't even know that. Most people have no idea that there are U.S. troops in Syria, bumping up against Russian troops, stealing Syria's oil, and causing great hardship for the people in the country. And I also want to point out this war propaganda campaign, where we were told, you touched on being told that Assad was gassing his own people. Now, why would Assad gas his people when the world is looking at him? Why would you do that? And I knew the game they were playing, the OPCW, which is a UN organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons. I think I'm getting it right. Let's just say OPCW in case I got it wrong. They are charged with investigating chemical weapons use. And suddenly they said, the OPCW shouldn't just be able to detect chemical weapons use. They should have the ability to determine who did it and come up and declare someone the culprit. And I said, let me guess. Suddenly they're going to be gas attacks in Syria. Well, sure enough, they said that Assad was gassing people. There was one incident. Is Duma the place?
And the funny thing is, we gas our own people. We used tear gas as a war crime. I'll let you finish, Margaret. But that's why it's so absurd. They accuse them of doing exactly what we do to our own people. But go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, it's usually projection, isn't it? So a group of civilians were killed, and nobody. What many observers think happened is these jihadists I've been talking about kidnapped these civilians and killed them themselves. And then we were told Assad was the one who did it. So OPCW inspectors went in, and one of them, a gentleman from South Africa, I think his name was Henderson, he said, wait a minute. He was a whistleblower. He said, this report is bogus. We don't have any evidence of this. Autopsies didn't show evidence of, I think they said it was chlorine gas. The corporate media aided and abetted, and this was the Trump administration, who they allegedly didn't like, that people were gassed. And I remember this picture of was supposed to be a gas canister, which, by magic fell onto a bed, and it was just, there it was, just laying there. New York Times got Pulitzer Prizes, got all sorts of praise for this made up story. U.S. allies killed civilians to make it look like Assad did it in order to get buy-in for some kind of a military intervention. And it's a story that the fact that this whistleblower came forward has been covered up by corporate media, by supposed leftists like Amy Goodman. All of them have trafficked in this story in order to make the case for this full spectrum dominance that I talked about earlier.
I remember Cenk Uygur. It was one of the things that made me, I was like, I would never ever support TYT, because I remember clearly that Cenk Uygur was calling for a regime change with Assad. But go ahead, James. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about the phrase "full spectrum dominance." I don't want to look at Wikipedia because
I'm gonna. It's actually, I believe it's a Defense Department term that the U.S., it's a state term. It's a full spectrum dominance of the U.S. The ultimate purpose of this was what the Pentagon called full spectrum dominance across the entire spectrum of conflict, from conventional war to irregular forms of conflict. So this is a term actually created by the state, and it describes perfectly what the U.S. does all over the world.
Yeah, and it's exactly what they accuse China of doing. Because China, like, if you actually listen to Xi Jinping and what comes out of the Chinese government, they always talk about cooperation, how they don't want conflict with the West, how they want to build and grow prosperity. Meanwhile, compare that to the United States, how they're all about domination. But go ahead, JB. I know you want to say something.
You know what this reminds me of? Homophobes. Stay with me here. A homophobe typically will accuse other men. Oh, you're gay. You're doing gay stuff. Look at you. You're doing gay stuff. When in reality, they're the ones that are doing it. This is the same thing that homophobes do. Is what the United States does. I know you guys weren't looking for that, but it's just, that's what it feels like. It's like you're blaming people for the very thing you're doing to take the smell off of you. That's basically like saying that's he who smelt it dealt it.
Well, I was saying it's projection. It's absolutely projection. It's whatever the U.S. is doing. They point a finger at somebody else and accuse them of something that they are guilty of.
Yeah.
And it's a way to demonize people. Anybody you want to attack, to demonize, diminish, have disappeared from all the discourse, you just point a finger and accuse them of doing what you're already doing.
Speaking of projection, I remember I saw this segment, because you guys know I've been watching way too much corporate media recently. I saw this segment where they was talking about Russia and MSNBC, because they were trying to convince liberals to hate Russia. They were saying that how Russia is a militaristic society that neglects their people in order to promote endless war. I was like, projection much? I remember there was an entire segment where that was the entire theme. They were like, how Russia ignored the will of their people in order to engage in war.
It's what's the expression? Every accusation is a confession. Is that how it goes? It's something like that. And does Russia have the military budget that the U.S. does? Russia, China, if you put their military budgets together, you still don't equal the military budget of the U.S. They really said that? They, ignored the needs of their people. it's almost funny. I guess if you're in a good mood, you can laugh about it. But we see in the we're talking about Syria, but this is something that we can discuss the same issues about the rest of the world. About, you mentioned Venezuela, or the countries right next door, Cuba. The U.S. is punishing, going out the door. It's like a couple of days before Inauguration Day, the Trump administration declared that the Cuban government was state-sponsored terror, and that ramps up sanctions. So there were already harsh sanctions for 60 some odd years. Now Cuba's economy is cratering. They even kept, so for example, European countries always let their people visit. So Cuba depended on European tourists. So the US told anybody, if you go to Cuba, you can never enter the United States, and killed their tourism industry. So they can't import. I read mammogram machines. Cuba doesn't have enough mammography machines. And that means there's more women with breast cancer. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
The things that the US does. And why Cuba? Because it's the threat of a good example. That people might look, 90 miles away and say, well, that's not so bad. Or what I was told in the papers isn't true, or Cubans are doing okay. No. They can't have that. And so Biden comes in and follows Trump foreign policy. After Obama, who I rarely say anything good about, restored diplomatic relations and put out, Congress made it almost impossible for any president to lift sanctions. But there was a new way forward. There was a difference. And so Biden's even worse. So Trump changes it and Biden follows Trump. I thought Trump was a fascist. I thought Trump was like Hitler. I thought he was the worst person ever. He's Satan's cousin, but Biden foreign policy is Trump foreign policy. It's true in Israel. These Abraham Accords, where they get these traitorous Arab governments to recognize Israel, that started with Trump. And the Biden people talk about it all the time. So, we see how the bipartisan consensus is never anything that's good for people in this country or around the world.
Yeah, and this is the receipt I put up, and James, I'll pass right to you. But look, I'm going to read it for people only listening. Cuba says Biden applies blockade even more aggressively than his predecessors. And that's a joke I made earlier with Nico and Fiorella, where Kamala Harris and Joe Biden might as well put a MAGA hat on and tan their skin orange because they jacked his entire fucking swag. They stole his whole fucking flow. Like, they took his Iran policy. They took his border policy. They doubled down on the Cuban policy as seen here. They doubled down on the anti-China trade wars. Mm-hmm. You have Nicolas Maduro, who was calling for the end of the Cuban blockade. You have AMLO of Mexico. In fact, there was just a vote where the only states who voted against it was Ukraine and the United States. And maybe Israel, I think it was Israel as well.
Every year they have the vote at the UN, and every country except the US and one or two puppets say that the US sanctions against Cuba should end. But international law doesn't mean anything to these people. And the UN is weak. Israel can kill UN workers, and the Secretary General Guterres, he'll go on Twitter and say, it's terrible, people died. Died how? Killed by whom? Who dropped the bomb? The UN, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, they're all a joke. That's how Israel has continued its genocide for the past year. And that's something else that needs to change. These international institutions are a joke. The OPCW does what the US says. The ICC, they issued an arrest warrant for Putin. How do you not have an arrest warrant for Netanyahu? How has the ICJ dragged its feet after this this genocide is the most well documented in history. But they don't do anything about it because they're under the thumb of the US. So that's the great challenge of the world to end U.S. domination.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
gave Hamas and James, I'll pass it. They gave Hamas more criminal charges than Israel.
Yes.
How can the ICC put an arrest warrant on Benjamin Netanyahu and accuse him of war crimes without also indicting the person providing the weapons, Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken? They did it because it was a political decision to make sure more Hamas people were charged in Israel. I agree with you, Margaret. These institutions are a joke. But sorry, go ahead, James.
No, you know what? And my thing is why haven't they also went after former presidents, right? Wasn't it President Barack Obama that had Anwar al-Awlaki? I'm butchering his name. My apologies, but he was a U.S. citizen. His 16-year-old son was also a U.S. citizen, and he had them killed. So my question is, why aren't they actually putting out an arrest warrant for people like Barack Obama as well? Because he literally had, in fact, here it is. I found it. Let me share my screen really quick, because a lot of people don't realize that Obama actually had U.S. citizens murdered abroad. And this also has to be spoken of. So shout out to a friendly neighborhood comrade. Let me enlarge this so you guys can see. It says in 2011, an Obama ordered drone strike killed 16-year-old Abdullah Hamran al-Awlaki, his teenage cousin, and 5 other civilians as they were eating at an outdoor cafe in southern Yemen. This is him.
Yes, and his father was killed by. Remember, Obama had his, what was it, the kill list? And once a week they had these meetings. I mean, then they tried to say, well, we didn't say it was Obama. It was actually somebody else. The story the Obama administration leaked to the New York Times, I will never forget it, was that Obama himself presided over these kill list meetings to determine who the United States could murder around the world. They killed the father, and I think you're right, it was Anwar al-Awlaki. And not content to murder him, they murdered his son and these other people in a drone strike. And there's literally, people need to know what these drone strikes do. There's literally nothing left of your body. I mean, the young Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, I think they found his scalp or something. He was identified by his hair. I mean, it was horrible. So, that is what the United States does. And so the only, people make this big deal. Trump is the only president to have been convicted of a crime. Well, he shouldn't be. The rest of them should have been, if there was any justice in the world, they would be before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. But there's no crime that's too terrible. Actually, the worse the crime, the more likely you are to get to be charged with something. Trump, they went after him because he wouldn't go away, because he insisted he didn't lose, which I believe he did lose, but he wouldn't go away. He said, I'm running again. So I think, if it was anybody else, they would have left him alone. And I think this was all an effort to try to get rid of him. And now he could be the president again, which would be a very interesting thing to see, to put it mildly.
Yeah, your point about the drones and the way they brutally murder people is an important point, because you will see, for example, like during October 7th and the way the establishment talk about it, they will say stuff like, and they will do this to anybody, not just Hamas. They will say Russia brutally murders Ukrainians. Hamas brutally murders Israel. What do our bombs do? Gently murder people? Like, what? You guys see the propaganda they use? Like the way we, that's the point. Anyway, go ahead, James. like we kill people gently.
This is going to be pretty much my final question, because I want to make sure that we put a pin in this.
Yes, sir.
But would you both, and starting with you, Margaret, and then you can follow Nick, would you agree that to say people like Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, George W. Bush, Benjamin Netanyahu, would you agree that people like them are far and away more dangerous than a Bashar al-Assad or a Vladimir Putin or even a Kim Jong-un or a Nicolas Maduro? Would you say because of the record of what they've done, they are far and away more dangerous?
Well, of all the people you listed, only Netanyahu and Biden have presided over planned starvation. They're the only ones who bomb refugee camps, who bomb hospitals, who bomb. Gaza has no universities left, no functioning hospital left, who have ethnic cleansing as a government policy, and they get cover for doing so by because the U.S. covers for them. The U.S. runs interference for them. So they're the worst. I'm sorry. I fail to see how anybody other than Biden and Netanyahu could win the most horrible leader contest. Of course, whoever wins I think it's 4 weeks from now, will be their successor, because Trump and Kamala Harris both are pledged to continue this policy. And other leaders around the world, whatever they may do, they, first of all, don't have the power to do what the U.S. and its allies get to do. So yeah, the U.S. is the worst. Period. Fight me. That's my response.
I used to laugh at the Bernie leftists during our hard divorce when I was warning these people not to vote for Joe Biden. A lot of these people had Putin derangement syndrome, like Matt Duss, Bernie Sanders, Faye Secure, all these people have Putin derangement syndrome. And my response to their Putin derangement syndrome and the derangement syndrome over Assad and all these people was like, look at the scoreboard, bro. Like, do you guys really think that Vladimir Putin has a kill count, including Ukraine, anywhere near the amount of Joe Biden and Netanyahu? It doesn't even come close. The average president, these people that Americans vote for, their kill count completely fucking dwarfs the kill count of these quote unquote tyrannical leaders that we are told to hate. And then, so my response to those people is, why do you vote for someone you hate Putin? But so why would you vote for someone who has bigger kill count than Putin? And the only thing they can say is just outright racism and dehumanization, because from there they only have one option. They will have to explain to you why the lives of the United States empire, the lives that we take, means less than the lives of the dictators that they have derangement syndromes over. So if you're willing to vote for the Democratic Party and vote for people who have kill counts that dwarf the quote unquote tyrants you claim to hate, you don't have the moral high ground over anybody. Period.
No, you don't. And it's, what do people say about Trump? If you vote for Trump, clearly racism is not a red line for you. Well, if you vote for Kamala Harris, genocide's not a red line for you. Right?
Yep. And one of the things that our dear brother Cornel West got upset at me at, because I said that he was weak on white supremacy, and I didn't mean it as like a character attack. He took it very badly, and I understand why he did, but it wasn't a character attack when I said that. He voted for Joe Biden, and he praised election Navalny. So the hood I come from, there is no fucking quarter for white supremacy, including voting for Joe Biden. So Dr. Cornel West took it as a personal attack. It really wasn't. It was a professional criticism, where if you propping up these white supremacist monsters, I personally view that as being weak on white supremacy. That's just how I view people who vote for the Democratic Party with the amount of damage they have done. You know what I mean? But go ahead, James and Margaret.
Yeah, the only thing, it's not really a pushback. It's kind of funny. It's like, I kind of argue that George W. Bush is probably the worst because a million Iraqis, but at the same time, there's really no equating, because they're all genocidal maniacs, so it's just like, hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, it's like, which one is the
worst? I used to actually, and we actually talked about this a few times while I was very torn on who was the worst president in my lifetime. I would say George W. Bush Jr., because he's the person who radicalized me, the Iraq war, the torture. But Bill Clinton laid a foundation for that. He got anything Ronald Reagan wanted to get done. But they're also the drone strike king. So I'll always bounce between these people. But after the Biden administration, it's over to me. I think with the fact that he is spanning the sanction regime, like he's sanctioning the 1/4 of the world's population. So if you criticize other presidents in that, just know Joe Biden doubled down on that. He's the worst president of all time on Palestine and Gaza, not even close. God's closer to nuclear war than any other president based on the doomsday clock. Like, and I can go on and on, but for the sake of time, I'll stop there. I can keep going. But well, and then obviously just opinion, but this is why I think Biden is easily the worst president of our lifetime.
But I have to add something here. All of these people are chosen by the oligarchs. That's why people saying Kamala Harris, why she won't do anything for Black people because she's not really Black. She won't do anything for Black people because the oligarchs have already told them, you're not doing anything for it. They won't raise the minimum wage, which would help white people. So no, they all live under this dictatorship of capital. Congress is a big money laundering machine. Giving, when they say money for Ukraine, they mean money for weapons manufacturers. That means money for Raytheon and that ilk. And that's who controls all of them. That's who determines who presidents are going to be. And then they try to act like we have some big decision to make. The decisions are already made. Look what they did with Biden. They pushed him through 4 years ago. Anybody with common sense could tell he was not well. And that people didn't want him, but they made him the nominee. Then they, for reasons known only to themselves, thought they could get away with it a second time. I thought they were going to ease him out, but they tried to push him through, although some people say it was deliberate. It was a way to get Kamala in there anyway. Then no one voted for Kamala Harris. Republican voters chose Donald Trump. He actually had the more democratic process. Then they try to push her on us. She's vapid. I don't think she cares about anything. She's so singularly unimpressive to me. The word salads, the nervous laughter, she allowed these, rich people to promote her beyond her skill set. And now they're telling us, and they got rid of Biden. They're like, well, we can't, we got to have Kamala. So that's the kind of system we live under, the dictatorship of capital. Rich people deciding our fate.
Yeah, I honestly feel like, a lot of people need to wake up to the fact that the lines between the Democrats and Republicans have not just blurred, but they actually completely disappeared. They've been wiped off the map. And as the more people see, the more they start to realize that there really is no difference. And it's like, one is going to promise that they're going to love you, and one says, I don't love you. But the one that promises actually doesn't actually love you. And the one that says, I don't love you, they actually just tell you they don't love you. So it's like, what's the difference? They both don't love you. So why in the world are you still staying with them? It's just.
We're going to have to struggle. We have tomorrow is Wednesday, Black Agenda Report Day. And I have I've been having these conversations with the Jammu Baraka. And we were talking about the election, and he said, we're going to have to struggle no matter who wins. And we're going to have to struggle over different things, perhaps, but the people are going to have to struggle regardless of who wins. And this idea that one person's going to be our savior and the other person is a demon from hell is one we need to get rid of. We've got to stay organized. We've got to stay mobilized and not fall for the okie doke that these people are trying to sell us.
Yep, absolutely. So with that being said, where can they find you, all your socials and all that other good stuff that you can promote?
blackagendareport.com. We have new issue every Wednesday. Black Agenda Radio on Friday. My handle is Freedom Ride Blog on X. If you just say X, do people know you're talking about Twitter? Anyway, I don't know. Freedom Ride Blog is my handle, and Black Agenda Report is also on the X platform.
Yep. And don't forget to get Margaret Kimberley's book, Presidential Black America and the Presidents. If you really want to know more about the presidents in a very digestible form, one of the things I always say is the best type of teacher is one that can explain complex concepts in a very easy to digest fashion so that you're able to understand. You've done it masterfully in this, and I'm reading this on my channel as well. So I thank you very much for this. This is actually a gem. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much, James. Thank you both.
Thank you so very much. So we'll be getting into the super chats as well as the patron shout outs. But thank you so much for joining us, Auntie Margaret.
Thank you so much. And I know you're in Florida, so good luck to you, James, as this Hurricane Milton, approaches your state.
I'm prepared.
Good for you. So do be well. Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye-bye. All right. So ready to get into the super chats and then head on out?
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool. So just to let you guys know, thank you very much to everybody for tuning in. We're going on the Rockfin side, checking for any Rumble rants to see if we have any of those. And if we do, then we can display those. Looks like we're good here. So thank you very much for that. Let's go on to the YouTube side. Good to see all of you here remaining with us. We have JX Scott 6 says Goldman Sachs BlackRock has no term limits. Absolutely. I fully agree with that. Thank you very much for that. Super Seamster Sewing Show says Margaret Kimberley. I love Margaret Kimberley. RBN teaches truth. Bakersfield. Thank you so very much. And just a couple of ones from here. Zach says the Zionist entity just committed a massacre in a residential area of Damascus tonight, so we might see a further escalation there. Of course, they're going to be doing something like this while we have a major hurricane going on, so that the hurricane will take up most of the news, and then they can actually murder people with impunity. So thank you very much for that. Adingo Amy Baby says, James and Nick, you should reach out to Vanessa Beeley in the UK, a journalist living in Syria. Once the attempted overthrow began, Fiorella can connect you. Okay, we can definitely do that. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Strangelove says this channel is so much better. Oh my gosh. Oh Lord. James Starks, I want to address this. Says great show, Nick and Margaret Kimberley. James Fauntleroy, why are you and Savvy competing for this time? Once you two again is now allowing super stickers, I think you're under attack. All power to RBN. We're not actually competing. This was the available time that we have. This is just one show. We typically don't go live at this time on Tuesday nights. And I do encourage you guys to go and flood Savvy's channel once we finish this. So go ahead and do that as well. Go ahead and give our sister some love. All right. So with that being said, I don't think we have any more super chats for today, but thank you so very much to everybody for tuning in. Any last words, Nick?
Yeah, make sure you guys check out the show that I did with Fiorella and Nico. That was very fun. It was a great free-flowing foreign policy live stream with my friends. Also have Scott Ritter scheduled for tomorrow, so we have another banger. I was thinking about doing Rumble only for that stream, but I saw Danny Haifong. Danny Haifong had Scott Ritter on, and he was okay. So, I think we're okay with having him on YouTube. Maybe we could talk a little bit afterward, JB, but because I saw Danny had him on, but he's either way. Scott Ritter is on tomorrow, so we have another banger scheduled. This is my second live stream today. We got Hotspot that just released. I literally just tweeted it out as we was live here, so it was a long day for me, but I'll be back tomorrow as well.
Yeah, and for everybody that's asking about the storm, I think I'm going to be okay. We got some lights, we got batteries, we have water, and I do expect the power to be out. There will be no Savvy and JB show on Thursday, just to let you guys know, for obvious reasons. We will be dealing with Hurricane Milton, but then I'll try to be back this Sunday. I can't say that for sure for the JB show here on RBN, but thank you very much for all the well wishes. I'm going to try to go live tomorrow from my channel tomorrow when the hurricane comes in to share with you guys what's actually going on the ground, because we can't depend on corporate media like that. And this is going to be a big one. And I don't want to scare people, but I have never seen a meteorologist cry on camera before until today. And so this is how serious it is. Check on your working class and poor friends. And if they ain't got nothing, try to send them something, especially if it's money, so that they can be able to get some last minute things. There may be a couple stores that may be open tomorrow morning. But if you can help them out, please make sure to do that. All right. So with that being said, we're going to head on out. Yep. Shout out to the patrons on our way out. You guys have yourself a great night. And like Savvy says, keep up the fight. Bye, everybody.